All right, well, Thorsten, thanks for the invitation. First, I should emphasize that I'm delighted to present to the University of Loughborough and the faculty there. I've, as you mentioned, been involved in lots and lots of service things across my career. And this is the most recent one. So what I'm going to go through with you is just a few key aspects of ServCollab, and the title of my talk is The Path to Serving Humanity Through Collaboration. So let me get right to that, and I've saved time at the end for questions and interaction, but let me share enough with you that you have a better sense of what we've been trying to do. But if I can get the right button here, there we go. First, I need to give you a better sense of my perspective on life and my purpose, which is seeking fairness is my personal quest. And it was witnessing the horrors of the year 1968 that created my perspective and purpose in life. I was 14, and there were civil rights protests, there were women's rights protests, the Vietnam War was happening, there were problems all over the world. And assassinations. I mean, the list is quite long. And as a very impressionable 14, I was deeply, deeply affected by that. And I became obsessed with making change happen ever since. So basically, what I did from 1968 after finishing high school, I went and got 3 business college degrees in 9 years, finishing with a marketing PhD at Arizona State in 1980. My research topics, Thorsten's touched on it, but basically service research was the beginning in 1980 of my research. I've done service history research, service theater, service design. And for more than a decade now, I've been working on what I would call serving humans research. And on leadership, I've twice been a marketing department chair for a total of 23 years. I'm very masochistic, as you can tell, by 23 years. I also was the founder of ServCollab, which Thorsten has already mentioned, in 1993. And ServCollab I founded in 2018. At that point in 2018, it was just Ray and his crazy ideas, but there's a lot more that I'm going to share with you today. And note that from 68 to 2018, it took me 50 years to get to the point that I thought maybe there's a way we could work on fairness beyond what I'd ever been able to do before. And at the bottom of my slide, just for fun, I put the cover of my dissertation with the title Post-Choice Evaluation and Equity Theory Analysis of Consumer Satisfaction and Dissatisfaction with Service Choices. So service became an obsession, but it was also the fairness, the equity theory analysis, the fairness. So the 3 topics I have for you are: first, what is ServCollab and why? ServCollab's perspective on publications is the second topic. And third, building research capacity to serve humanity. So first then, what is ServCollab and why? ServCollab's purpose and process is the easiest way to capture what we're about. ServCollab itself is a contraction of serving humanity through collaboration. In other words, ServCollab that I've highlighted in bold. So serving humanity is our purpose, to serve humanity. And through collaboration is the process we pursue to achieve that purpose. And it's based on transformative service research, so I'm going to do a little more on transformative service research with this slide. TSR is a call for service research that advocates for the personal and collective well-being of consumers, citizens, and the entire global ecosystem. And I'm listing 2 sources there. Those were 2 major groups that developed the transformative service research topic. Laurie Anderson was the key instigator on that. Laurie Anderson and I have known each other since 1978, so I got invited to be part of the group that developed transformative service research. And I was delighted that Laurie knew that I might be interested in her idea. And so it became a key logic for what we're doing with ServCollab. So ServCollab's upframed mission, I'm going to share with you here, and I say upframed because we had a prior mission that didn't have the part that I've got in green. But let me talk about the whole mission. To serve humanity through research collaborations that catalyze reducing suffering, improving well-being, and enabling well-becoming. And we've added this last part, this enabling well-becoming, because as I've worked now on ServCollab since 2018, we became convinced that the well-being that was built into TSR logic might not be enough. And so we've added enabling well-becoming. And I'm delighted with that because we're trying to push even harder and higher with what we've been trying to do. So a little bit on the challenge of serving humanity here with this slide. Fundamentally, science about humans is difficult and remarkably fragmentary. Now, there's all kinds of mistakes that have been made in science about humans. Psychology research that was making mistakes, economics research that was making mistakes. Basically, it's hard for us humans to hold a mirror up to our minds or even our bodies. It's hard for us. And fantasy and wishful thinking are really difficult for us to overcome. We're really incredibly good as a species. Fantasy is probably a superpower for us. And ServCollab seeks to enable a transformative synthesis of human knowledge that establishes a resilient foundation for serving humanity through collaboration. So that synthesis of human knowledge is a key part of our efforts, and it requires collaboratively testing service ideas and collaboratively converting them into service actions. So we're trying to go from ideas to actions, and actions are always a lot harder than ideas. So, as an overview of our goals for research and application, I've got on the left side of the slide kind of obvious labels for research, basic and applied. And you might think, well, what would be basic about research on serving humanity? Well, that would be it. It would be very basic conceptual research on humans. And then applied research, which would get to the action stage too, not just the idea stage. And then the applications part specifically would include topics in suffering, topics in well-being, and topics in well-becoming. And we've already touched on all those topics with some of the material I'll share with you during the presentation. So that gets me to our ServCollab perspective and publications. And our ServCollab's perspective was developed in this introductory article that I've got shown on the right side of the screen. It was written with the ServCollab Advisory Board. Our title of the research was Elevating the Human Experience Through Service Research Collaborations, Introducing ServCollab. So you can see the list of names there. In addition to me, everyone else is the advisory board. It's Linda Alcar, Laurie Anderson, who of course was the key founder of the Transformative Service Research effort, David Bowen, he was a management professor, Thorsten Gruber, who of course you know well, don't you? Thorsten was a key participant partly because Thorsten brought a very international perspective. Everyone I listed up to Thorsten was based in the United States. In addition, Amy Ostrom, who was another one of the co-founders of the Transformative Service Research, and Leah Patricio, a former student of mine, a doctoral student of mine in Portugal. She's in the engineering school. So we had a management professor, we had an engineering professor, we had two countries represented, the UK and Portugal. And Linda Alcar, I'm going to come back to because Thorsten was her co-supervisor, and I was able to hire Linda, and Linda has become a key participant in ServCollab. And on the board of directors, the actual legal board of directors for ServCollab, Laurie Anderson and Linda Alcar are the two members of the board with me, the three of us. And in fact, it's a great combination because Linda's the person I've known the most briefly, and Laurie's the person I've known the longest of the group. So it gives me the two sides of the perspective of two really important collaborators. So I'm going to share you several things that actually aren't in the article because we've been devolving the research since that article came out in 2020. It's 2 years later, going on 3. So what I've got here is 3 nested levels of human experience. And again, it's not in the article. But basically, in the circles on the right, the small personal experience in blue is the micro level of human experience. The experience that each of us has, but it's ours alone. It is very personal. Then there's the social experience, which is bigger. It's interacting with other humans. And obviously, the personal happens inside the social. We have personal perspectives on what we interact, how we interact with people. Then there's the external, the bigger level, which is humans interacting with the external environment. Each of these levels is a unique service zone, and the service zones interact too. And social experience is fundamentally the greatest challenge, and at the heart of what we normally mean by service is happening in that social interaction, social experience stage. So I'm going to keep going with some more tied to the social aspects here. And service itself occurs in interactions of two kinds, the social part, but I'm having to add now versus my previous slide, I'm having to add monetary interactions because business schools have especially been interested in monetary interactions. And of course, so much of the logic of what is published and people research in business schools is in some way goes back to and links back to interactions that are tied to money. But we need to remember that humans are both. We have social interactions and monetary interactions, and that's why I've got this slide. Again, it's not in the original Foundation article. So I'm looking at human experience and social roles. So I've grouped the experiences into private experiences and public experiences. And on the private side, there are family roles that we all know, parents, children, grandparents, extended family members. And on the friends roles, where there's obviously close friendships and social friendships. Then the public experiences are the customer roles and employee roles that are very public. So in red, I've got that all of those private experiences are mostly non-monetary. We don't typically exchange money with friends and family. It's not a typical thing. Sure, it might happen as a side aspect, but it's not the heart and the essence of the private side. Whereas the public experiences are mostly monetary interactions. So that's in this slide, an attempt to look at really the social parts of human experience in the context of private and public. So that gets me to an idea that was in our original article, but I've adapted it slightly from what was in the article. Because in the article, we actually had a table from conflict to competition to cooperation and then to collaboration. And this one, I've actually made it a hierarchy of human interactions from conflict at the bottom left of the slide here to in the middle, competition and cooperation, and more of a slow slope, and then the higher slope up to collaboration. In our article, we advocated that collaboration is the best and highest form of human interaction. And here's why, which we didn't have in the article quite. We didn't quite say it or portray it the way I'm doing here. But basically, all the previous forms before collaboration do not have shared purpose. Conflict certainly doesn't. I mean, look what's happening in Ukraine because of Putin. Or look what's happening in protests in China. I mean, there are all kinds of conflicts of various kinds that have happened. And it was those kinds of things that got me on my obsession with fairness. It was the conflicts of various kinds in 1968. And the competition and cooperation are really where so much of human society has tended to get stuck in competitive mindsets and cooperation mindsets. And then we slip backwards into conflict too frequently. So I think part of the problem with competition is that it can easily degenerate into conflict. And cooperation can frequently be forced cooperation as opposed to willing cooperation. Whereas if we get to shared purpose, everybody is agreeing to it. And of course, it's hard. So this is part of the reason for the hierarchy. So key idea there. And to come back to a key idea that I've implied but not explained well enough for you yet, humans live in service systems. Human life occurs in nested service systems from families to cities to nations and organizations. And organizations are nested in various ways. Like you can have a family business. You can have organizations of many kinds in cities and organizations of many kinds in nations. I'm including corporations among organizations, but there are many nonprofits, there are government organizations, there are many kinds of organizations. All of those things happen because we're a social species. And on my next bullet point there, the future is the primary purpose of family service systems. I think we can describe families as the first service system, and they enabled all the other service systems because they were the biological unit that allowed our species to slowly evolve to where we are today. And fundamentally, human service systems enable that human progress. But for most of human history, and this is a key reason the ServCollab is something that I've created, is for most of human history, human service systems have neglected or excluded some of the people within the service systems. It was that kind of stuff that upset me in 1968. So that gets me to this slide, inequality in service systems. After doing extensive research across my long life and career, I have become steadily convinced that inequality is not a flaw in our human nature. Now, when I was first researching this back in the 70s, there were lots of people who were saying that it was a flaw in our nature. I was always skeptical of that. It always seemed to me to be highly unlikely. Now I am extremely convinced that it is not. I think it's a flaw in the design of our service systems. that the system itself is the problem. It's not the human that's the problem. It's the systems that we've built that are actually exploiting us. And inequality has a very long history in service systems. It's the systems of patriarchy, of aristocracies, of emperors, slavery, feudalism, colonialism. They were all designed for inequality. And look at how durable some of those inequalities are. That hundreds of years later, the after effects of some of these inequality systems are still with us, still lingering, still causing problems. Like take the United States, the after effects of slavery in the United States are still with the United States. So fundamentally, we need to design for fairness. Now, that gets me to our first articles. After the article that announced ServCollab that Thorsten and I and the other 5 were part of, we initiated 2 projects very shortly around the time after I was getting involved with the advisory board. One was published in the Journal of Public Policy and Marketing, the other in Service Science, so let me go through them. Now, the first ServCollab research project article is titled Rethinking Service Systems and Public Policy, a Transformative Refugee Service Experience Framework. So we were focusing on refugees. Silke Bonique from Germany led that effort. Sertan Kabadai at Fordham University and I were also the co-chairs of that project. There were 10 others. There was a group of 13 that I mentioned in the last bullet from 7 countries, 8 members as migrants. And we started it back in May 2019 at a Transformative Consumer Research Conference. The key thing I should add about this is that the research project label that I'm using here is our effort to develop a foundation for a topic area. That foundation, we hope, becomes a future foundation for other researchers, which is why that second part of the title is critical, a Transformative Refugee Service Experience Framework. So we picked refugees more by accident than anything else. I mean, Linda Alkire and I had worked on refugees, and some of the others had worked on refugees in various ways. So 13 of us, and Linda Alkire is part of that group on that one. And by the way, I will show you all the 3 article citations in the very last slide. And Thorsten, I forgot to emphasize this at the beginning. You're welcome to share all these slides with the faculty after I'm done here. So the first perspective article, the first ServCollab perspective article was Service Ecosystem Health, a Transformative Approach to Elevating Service Science. It was the lead article in a 2021 Service Science Special Issue on reimagining the science of service. And again, the journal itself is called Service Science. This is one that we barely got through the review process. One reviewer thought it was just crap and thought it should be rejected. And we reminded the editors that they asked us to reimagine, and as we pointed out to the editors, we weren't convinced that the reviewer was really remembering that the purpose of the submission was to reimagine. So they actually yanked that reviewer. They sent it out to a different reviewer, and we managed to get through that process. A little bit of an iffy situation, but we succeeded. Linda and I are quite happy with this article, and I'm going to show you just one key idea from it. We proposed, among the many things in that article, what we call the Goldilocks civilization thought experiment. So here are the key details on the slide. We said that the Goldilocks civilization thought experiment reimagines human service systems to expand their ability to support individual human life, human societies, and the biodiversity of planet Earth. Now, in our foundation article, we talked about climate change too, even though we're focused on humans, but humans can't live without Earth. We can't live without climate. We need it all. So in this thought experiment, the primary challenge is protecting the natural rights of individuals, encouraging the vigor of human societies, and nurturing the planetary health of life on Earth. Obviously not a simple thought experiment, but we really thought, well, if things are such a mess, how about a thought experiment to give us a goal? And Goldilocks, in case it's not obvious, is the old Chuck Turner story about 3 bowls of porridge, one's too hot, one's too cold, one's just right. Planet Earth has often been described as in the Goldilocks zone, not too hot and not too cold, although there is some doubt about the not too hot because of climate change. So we've got some forthcoming stuff I'll briefly mention. We've got a forthcoming research article in the Journal of Service Research. That one I may have the electronic copies of this week even. It's out of the page proof stage. They're processing it at the Journal. The title is Healing the Digital Divide with Digital Inclusion, Enabling Human Capabilities. I'm the lead author. You'll see Andrew Gallon there, Alison Joubert, Janine Beekhuizen, Lily Chong, and Rebecca Russell Bennett. The last four names, they're all based in Australia. Andrew's in the United States, like I am. Allison and Lily were part of the Refugee Project. And this is a project that we started almost the same time as the Refugee Project. This one's had an even harder time going through the review process than the Refugee Project. But we finally succeeded in the fourth version. We finally got across the goal line with this one. And I'll show you one thing from it. This is our summary table of what we're convinced we had found in the research. We were looking at service employees and how they were helping students, how they were helping patients, and how they were helping social work people who were receiving social work. And we were looking at the behaviors that people were engaging in. On the top level of those steps that you see, the figure climbing in 4 steps, enabling opportunities, enabling choices, nurturing healing, and fostering happiness. Those are 4 pillars of service inclusion that is part of an article I wrote with others on service inclusion. In fact, Alison Joubert was part of that article, as a matter of fact. So we looked at inclusion as opposed to digital divide. Most of the research we were seeing on the digital divide had tended to be too obsessed with access to technology and not enough obsessed with those next 2 things, capabilities and outcomes. It's not enough to give a computer to a child. They need to know what to do with that computer. They need to have the capabilities so that they can actually accomplish things. That's outcomes. So our data gave us a window on all this done by service employees. So we're really delighted with this. I won't try to elaborate any further than that. Again, it'll be out very shortly. The other one that is forthcoming, and nearly the exact same timetable in terms of being out, also went through a long and painful review cycle. So forthcoming perspective piece, anyway, very conceptual and enabling a service thinking mindset, practices for the global service ecosystem. Linda Alcar is the lead author on this one. Rebecca Russell Bennett, Joe Previty, and I'm the 4th author on this. So 2 in Australia, Linda and I in the United States. This one, I don't have time to try to elaborate on because the conceptual work we did took us a long time to develop 5 practices for service thinking. And we're really happy that it finally got through the review process and delighted that we can soon be sharing more details about it. So there's a lot more things we have in the works that are not through review processes or even in review processes, but that gives you a good taste of it. That gets me to building research capacity to serve humanity. And obviously, part of what I've just shown you is about ServCollab's efforts so far to build research capacity to serve humanity. But there's so much. I mean, obviously, when I got obsessed with fairness in 1968, I would have been a fool to think there was a magic wand I could find somewhere and make change happen. I knew it was a big problem. I knew it was something that, if I was lucky, I might have the ability to have some influence on in my lifetime. But we need a lot more people to make any of this happen. So that's why Let's Do More is in the red subtitle there. ServCollab believes that service researchers are uniquely positioned to help accelerate human progress. And the key reason we think we're uniquely positioned is because we can see that humans live in service systems and that many of them are not fair. If we can find ways to rethink, reimagine, redesign the human service systems we live in, we can accomplish a lot. But we need to collaborate with many other researchers because service researchers don't understand everything about humans. None of us understand everything about humans. So starting with business schools, because everyone I've talked about, with the exception of Leah Patricio in all these various articles, is a business professor. I mean, Dave Bowen, for example, a management professor. But all business disciplines are concerned with human interactions, everyone in various ways. It's just a function of what is the perspective of accounting versus the perspective of finance versus the perspective of economics or management or marketing, etc., just to use 5 simple examples. Everyone has a different perspective on human interactions. And my second bullet point is part of the reason I became a business professor and became obsessed with business. It's because businesses have been the most creative service systems in human history. Remember I said I was looking to make change happen, and it seemed to me that businesses were capable of making changes that other human systems were not as quick to make. So to me, businesses were an exciting opportunity to be in a business school. And obviously, we all know that modern economies are premised on the substantial role of business. But there's more we can do. And part of the challenge is that our traditional business school perspectives are causing problems. We're solving corporate problems, not the problems of other organizations or of individuals. And we're mostly preparing students to work for corporations. So very profit-seeking, increasing shareholder value has been a traditional logic, and very monetarily based, monetary metrics to track progress. And in fact, it was one of those monetary transactions that led me to get obsessed with service, and that was that in the United States, counting monetary transactions led American economists to proclaim a service economy had emerged after World War II. They were convinced that in the aftermath of World War II, the service economy had suddenly appeared. Actually, what they'd missed is that it was women getting paid to work. That's actually why suddenly, because women were now in the monetary economy instead of just home with their children and not being in the monetary economy. That was a key reason why the service economy was discovered. And it's a humorous side note to the whole issue there. But there's a lot of reasons to think that business schools can go beyond our traditional thinking, and there are numerous calls for more. AACSB International, which I checked with the University of Loughborough's business schools that you're part of, is part of that. And there's a recent guiding principle number 2 from AACSB on societal impact. And in green, I've got the key phrase from that on societal impact, a force for good in society and makes a positive contribution to society. Now, I've been, as I've already emphasized, a professor for a very long time before leaving to lead ServCollab. That was not the way ACSB had its rules way back when I was in an early academic career in 1980, but things have changed. Another group that's much more recent versus AACSB is the Responsible Research and Business and Management Group, focusing on research as opposed to the schools that AACSB does. Their key phrase from their website is to research that improves the lives of people in our societies. And if you haven't checked out the Responsible Research and Business and Management, I'd encourage you to check on what they're doing. They've got awards for articles. I was lucky enough to be one of the co-signers of the early work because Mary Jo Bettner, one of the early service pioneers, was one of the originators of the Responsible Research and Business and Management Initiative. And she invited a lot of her service colleagues, friends, including me. And PRIME, that you're probably well aware of, PRIME is Principles for Responsible Management and Education. And in green, the key phrase from their mission is to transform management education and develop the responsible decision makers of tomorrow to advance sustainable development. So AACSB is looking at the schools, RRBM is looking at the research, PRIME is looking at the education, all looking to do more, which is exciting to me because the worst of fates for someone like me working on something like ServCollab, if I was trying to get other people to organize and the business schools were still stuck in the 20th century logic, I'd be very pessimistic, but I'm not. I'm very optimistic about opportunities here. And here's a headline from the article this week from the New York Times. This is the headline: Have the Anti-Capitalists Reached Harvard Business School? Just this week on Monday. And here's the two quotes I'll read. We're at Harvard Business School. It's a bastion of capitalism, said Ethan Rowan, who teaches the Harvard class Reimagining Capitalism. Note that the journalist got anti-capitalist out of Reimagining Capitalism. I'm pretty sure that journalist was not a business major. And then the quote from Ethan: I will say, though, that if you look at the courses being offered, the institutes being created, and the speakers we bring on campus, there is a huge demand both from the faculty and the students for rethinking the obligation of the corporation to society. And again, New York Times, I've got the link in that you can track down the New York Times. They have a paywall and everything, by the way, in case you didn't know that. Not my favorite aspect of the New York Times. So one last thing tied to business schools in this slide. If you haven't already learned about and explored big corporations, I would encourage you to do that. As the quote there says, the certified B corporations are a new kind of business that balance purpose and profit. They're legally required to consider the impact of their decisions on their workers, the customers, suppliers, community, and environment. And notice that last phrase, force for good, in that last statement. Community leaders driving a global movement of people using business as a force for good. I had learned about B Corporation several years earlier before I started teaching students about it. My last 2 years of teaching, I was having my students do B Corporation projects. There aren't that many B Corporations in Texas, but I've got the numbers for the UK for you. There are 1,389 B Corporations in the UK. But for marketing students, what I loved about the B Corporation logic is that instead of just marketing with customers, you also can talk about marketing with the employees, with the suppliers, with the community and the environment. More interactions. And marketing is very much focused on external interactions. The internal workers are often more of a management sort of a topic. But I should note that some of the early workers in service research, Len Berry and Christian Greenwas, both wrote about internal marketing way back in the early 1980s. So marketing's been thinking about that one for a while. So enough of that. Now let me get to ServCollab's efforts to co-create the future. In ServCollab, we are technology optimists. And human progress is often measured by our technological progress. And we believe that technology can and should serve humanity. Now, when I say the word optimist, that doesn't mean that we think that all technology is always good, but that it can and should serve. And we think that a Goldilocks civilization is possible because of the rapid evolution of computer technology. That's actually a quote from the article Linda Alkire and I wrote. And in fact, we have a technology for humanity project that's in the works on this very issue of technology. We can find lots of examples in recent times of technology being misused. Look at the misuse of social media, for example. That alone is a big area, and there's a lot of fears about misuse of artificial intelligence right now. But if humans create the tool, surely we can find ways of using the tool to help each other instead of hurting each other. And if we take one of the oldest of technologies, money, we've used money to hurt each other very often as opposed to using money to help each other. It's how we use our technology that determines opportunities in many, many circumstances. Some highly recommended books I need to touch on here real quick. If anything I've shared with you so far has you skeptical about the possibilities, I've got 3 books that might help you change your mind about that skepticism. There's a book by Vivek Murthy, who's was previously the Surgeon General of the United States, which is the key healthcare officer in the United States. He's actually the Surgeon General again in the United States. He wrote a book called Together, and the subtitle is The Healing Power of Human Connections in a Sometimes Lonely World. Excellent book about the key issues that we need each other. I recommend that one highly. The second book is Humankind, and this one's especially the issue. If you think we're really a vicious species and it's dog eat dog or any of that, read Humankind. Rutger Bregman, a Dutch researcher, and the subtitle is A Hopeful History. But you can see that he's got the humankind in 2 colors. His point throughout the book, he shows lots and lots of research showing that we're actually a kind species. It's a very optimistic book based on research, which I loved reading as one of my favorite books when I read it. I've recommended it highly to lots of people by now. And the third book is Pro-Social. Pro-Social is about processes for collaborating. It's based on Eleanor Ostrom's work, where she was a Nobel Prize-winning economist, the first woman to win the Nobel Prize, as a matter of fact. They expanded on her work and have done some wonderful stuff. So, some last key slides here. Can we rise above our perilous times? In our perilous times, it can be difficult to be optimistic. We all know that the world has plenty of problems. Look what COVID did to us. Look what things like the Ukraine war is doing to the rest of Europe, not to mention the rest of the world. I mean, there's an energy crisis that the world was experiencing before. The energy problems are even worse. And while human service systems seem remarkably fragile, if we can work together, we can overcome and rise above these service system problems. And again, that's collaboration. Further, many humans and many human organizations share a collective yearning to find solutions to these service system problems. And ServCollab seeks to help accelerate human progress on reducing suffering, improving well-being, and enabling well-becoming. And 2 last quotes to share with you. Here's a quote from way back from my childhood days, Martin Luther King Jr. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. That was a quote from 1963. That was during my childhood. Martin Luther King was assassinated in the year 1968, the year I became obsessed with fairness. And I've lived that quote, that the injustice of those times has affected my life indirectly. I mean, he was assassinated, so that's very direct in terms of the injustice of what happened to him. He's been an inspiration for many, many people, and many, many of those things of unfairness around the world are often inspirations. But the essence of that is, it's to me a really powerful quote, and in fact, we cite that quote in the beginning of the service thinking article that'll be forthcoming shortly. And a quote from the UK for you: "Only progress is sustainable." David Deutsch wrote a book called The Beginning of Infinity, and you might wonder, but wait, he's a physicist, he's a quantum physicist, so why am I quoting him? The part I love about his book, the part that really excited me, is that he's convinced that progress requires better explanations, better scientific explanations of how things work. And that fundamentally, to me, is the key thing that ServCollab is trying to help. We're trying to help develop better scientific explanations of how humans work in human societies and how we can work together better. So, if you're interested, after I've given you all those slides, here's some ways of joining us and getting involved. Again, these slides will be available so you don't have to try to write these down, but there's a link here to how to join a ServCollab on our website. You can sign up and get some of our communications, but you can also find us on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and there's my email last at ray.fisk@servcollab.org. So that's my whole talk for you, and then I'll obviously interact, and I'll turn off these slides so I can interact more effectively inside Teams, because I'm actually outside of Teams in a app called Home Studio where I'm recording this too. But in addition, in these slides, I've got the three articles that I've shown you that are actually published. Those are the full citations that you'll have as well. So let me stop with that and come back to Teams.